Says there may be further aftershocks after Tuesday's earthquake in the Orkney region in the northwest. At the same time, work is at a standstill at Anglo Gold Ashanti mines today. The epicenter was in Klerksdorp, Orkney and the Stilfontein area of the northwest where these mines are located. About 21 people in the Orkney-Klerksdorp area were injured. About 400 houses were damaged in the town. Well, for more on the tremor, we have in studio Dr. Herman van Niekerk from the University of Johannesburg's Geology Department. Good afternoon, Doctor, and thank you for your time on the PM News Desk.
Good afternoon.
Very quickly, tell us what's the difference between an earthquake and a tremor of this nature?
The big difference is the way that we define it is a tremor is earthquake waves that were formed due to human activity. For instance, mine collapse. While an earthquake produces earthquake waves due to natural processes. You know, plate tectonics, when the plates actually move on the surface of the earth, which is, you know, what drives geology.
Well, you've been liaising with your colleagues and other experts at this point. What's the explanation for a tremor like this, Doctor?
Well, you know, you've got to look at the most likely explanation for this, and the most likely is that the crust of the earth on which we're actually standing is under stress at the moment. And what happens with an earthquake like this is the rocks try to move because they're under stress, and eventually when they do move, the stress is being released. Now, we have to ask ourselves what is placing this crust under stress, and the most likely culprit, if you want to call it like that, is the East African Rift Valley that extends from the north of Africa towards the north of Mozambique at the moment, which is part of a structure that is trying to break Africa into two pieces. That is all due to what we as geologists refer to as plate tectonic processes. So that places the rest of the African continent, the crust, under stress. And these earthquakes are a way of nature to try and relieve the stress.
Could this possibly be the reason why we're experiencing a number of these quakes and tremors? Well, in the past year, we've had about 6.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, you know, one of the reasons why we think this is stress release. Because, you know, we've seen the tremors up in the Khuma, or earthquakes up in the Khuma area, end of 2011, the ones in Mozambique last year, and also, you know, smaller ones in the general area of where this big one has taken place.
Now, we're also hearing reports of potential aftershocks. How worried should we be, Doctor?
The aftershocks will most likely not be very big if there is a lot of aftershocks. We know about quite a number of them, but the worry comes in about when, as Robert Maulutsi also said earlier on, when we already have buildings that are damaged, now they're already weak, so when you've got aftershocks, those can collapse further. That's why people should stay away from these buildings and so on. And that's the biggest danger.
When it comes to these potential aftershocks, are we looking at certain high-risk areas, perhaps closer to the epicenter?
No, it can be somewhere in the general area, not necessarily at exactly the same epicenter, because that is now just like, you know, taking everything and bringing it back into balance again. That's what aftershocks actually do.
Why is it difficult to predict earthquakes, Doctor, like we can do with tsunamis or volcanic eruptions for that matter?
Well, the big reason is because we have to try and understand the stress in which the rocks are, the crust actually is. And that is huge. You know, so if we have to try and we use seismic, you know, instruments to try and monitor the movements in the Earth's crust and the stress buildup and so on. But because we're dealing with such a large scale, and also because geology is really actually a very young science, we've got a lot to learn, you know, and then still we have to cover a massive, massive area. So it becomes very difficult.
Could mining activity have triggered a tremor of this nature? But I suppose it's difficult to prove at this point.
We don't think so, definitely. First of all, it's just most likely too deep. Okay. Second of all, the magnitude is just too high for it being related to mining activities.
Let's talk about the high levels of acid mine water drainage that we have on the Highveld. Could this cause a stress on the environment? We know that it could cause rockfalls on the surface, but could it have an impact 10 kilometers deep?
Well, this is definitely not related to acid mine drainage. You know, acid mine drainage is mainly associated with the old mine workings, which we typically see towards the south of Johannesburg and towards the West Rand and East Rand. And all that the acid mine drainage will actually do is the acid water pretty much weakens the rocks, okay, and you will have more collapse. It will not necessarily remobilize faults so that you can have big earthquakes as of this nature.
Are you perhaps saying that the old fault lines will be weakened more with newer stresses being
You know, from acid mine drainage? No, definitely not. The acid mine drainage is just a process in which you actually start to dissolve the rocks and you actually make them weak by introducing all of the water into the system. What we're talking about here is what we geologists refer to as plate tectonic stresses. These are massive stresses. I mean, to give you an example, a magnitude earthquake like this sort of equates to around about 2,700 tons of TNT that gets, explosives that is blown up. That's the amount of energy we talk about released in an earthquake like this. So the only way you can do that is by having the plates, really stuck in a stress condition, and then they get released. You cannot do that with acid mine drainage.
All right, thank you. That was Dr. Herman van Niekerk joining us from the Department of Geology at the University of Johannesburg.